All right, guys, let's do our Get Real section.
When we get in a creative block, we usually just keep bullshitting.
You kind of filter in your mind like, this isn't good, so you don't write it. Everybody kind of self-edits like that a little bit. Find a way to be cool with bad ideas.
It didn't bother me.
Didn't bother him at all. It's like,
me at all.
nobody's
I was
gonna care.
No one's gonna care. Movie comes out,
Nobody ever mentioned it.
So I was
and we
right.
cut a lot of it out, so it's like...
You're listening to PROX.
One of our teachers said, like, you know, a long time ago, like, man, what's a movie that you really loved? And, like, when you tell somebody about that movie, like, when you're trying to get somebody to go see that movie, remember how excited you are when you're like, man, bro, I just see, you know what I mean? Like, dog, like, you have a different kind of enthusiasm when you're trying to convince somebody to go see a movie that you just saw that you loved. Even though we probably messed up a lot of, like, story points, and we probably skipped beats, and we over-elongated beats, we pitched the whole thing like we just saw Godzilla -1.
Sick.
You know what I'm saying? And so that enthusiasm in terms of that we were pitching it like,
Yes.
Fontaine, right? We pitched it in a way that made it seem like we thought it was the shit.
You're listening to In Proximity. Juel Taylor and Tony Retteinmaier are the screenwriting duo behind Creed 2, Space Jam: A New Legacy, and They Cloned Tyrone, a critical and fan-favorite film released on Netflix in 2023. It ingeniously blended science fiction, mystery, and comedy into a fun and funny thriller, starring John Boyega, Jamie Foxx, Tiana Paris, and Kiefer Sutherland. It was also Juel's directorial debut. Not too long ago, Juel and Tony were grad students at USC's film school, where they met Proximity founder and screenwriter-producer Sev Ohanian. On this episode, Sev, Juel, and Tony talk screenwriting across genres and formats, the art of the pitch, and how Juel and Tony went from student filmmakers to one of the most in-demand screenwriting duos in Hollywood.
All right, guys, let's do our Get Real section of the interview. Tony, why don't you start off by taking this first one and opening it up?
Okay. What's a recent purchase under $100 that has significantly impacted your life?
I got one. So if you know me, this is not a surprise, but I'm really big on productivity devices and things that help you optimize, get more efficient. I got totally targeted by the algorithm on Instagram, I think, for this little thing I bought. It's like $30, I think. It's essentially a timer. You put it on top of your desk, and you literally
Like an egg timer.
Yeah.
Exactly. You turn it to the right, and it'd be like 5 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever, and it just starts ticking down. The idea is, shoot, I got to do this thing I've been putting off, or I haven't been able to like wrap my head around this thing. You just turn that timer, and until that thing goes to zero, you're kind of like psychologically like compelled to do the job. I have found it to be really helpful.
Yeah, I saw the video for that. It looks really cool too. So
Yeah.
like it looks super satisfying.
It feels pretty cool just like turning it. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. I have a very non-exciting one that will maybe save my life. Maybe.
Okay.
I saw one of my friends recently, and she's like, "You're getting old. You need to wear sunscreen." So she sent me some like sunscreen from Korea, and so I've been putting that on these last 3 days. So I don't know. Maybe it'll save my life from skin cancer or something.
You are glowing.
Stop. Thank you.
I'm thinking. Literally, the only thing I can think that I bought in months is like probably a video game.
What game?
Probably Baldur's Gate 3, but I haven't played it yet. Last game that I've bought that I've been playing finally is probably Jedi Survivor. So maybe you can say that.
All right, let's open up the second one.
All right. Let me see. More creative-oriented question. What do you do to get through a creative block?
I know the in the moment one and the holistic one, I think. Because when we get in a creative block, we usually just keep bullshitting. And I feel like if we just keep talking about it enough, it accumulates enough mass that like, you know, becomes a sledgehammer you can break through or something. That's a great metaphor. And then holistically, I know like if I'm feeling kind of like drained or whatever, I know if I exercise, if I make time to do like a stupid hobby or something and do something like read consistently or go see a movie, I know if I do all those things, I think better. But even knowing that, it's hard for me to like keep that schedule sometimes.
No, for sure. I mean, yeah, I think definitely like brute force repetition in terms of like finding a way to be cool with bad ideas. You know what I'm saying? Like I think with like getting through a creative block, a lot of times it's like, you know, you kind of filter in your mind like this isn't good, so you don't write it, or this, you know what I mean? I think it's everybody kind of self-edits like that a little bit, and I feel like the more you can purge like the things that feel stupid, and you can kind of get them out into the atmosphere, like you know what I mean? The closer you start to get to like that was stupid, but something about it was actually kind of interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I really relate to the idea of brute forcing it, because I don't love this expression, but like what we always do is like we go like gun to your head. Don't think about it. Don't deliberate. Just like you have to give an answer to overcome this problem, and it's usually a bad one. And oftentimes there's a lot of prefacing like, "Hey, worst idea ever, but what if?"
Yeah.
But I think the scary part about creative blocks that like you don't often hear about is the like indecision that comes with it. Of like if we're trying to accomplish a story beat, for example, and like it's like there's no way that we can pull this off, because if we pull it off in this way, the movie becomes unrealistic, or it's wrong for tone, or like whatever other issues it causes. There's always like a fear of like, well, should we just be doing this thing instead? But if we could pull this off, it would be so amazing.
Yeah.
And like that, like, and like, you know, with my writing partner, there's always like one of us tends to be the negative one of like, well, it's not possible. Like we're not gonna figure it out. And the other one tends to try and be like, okay, but what if? And it always feels like if you ever solve the hardest creative problem, it ends up being, I think, like the most satisfying part of watching the movie.
Funny enough,
for sure.
Ironically enough, we literally had a stupid, like that's stupid, but it actually might work. If the thing we thought about through just sheer repetitive brute force actually comes to like work in terms of just the logistics, if it works, I think it would be one of the more interesting parts of the movie. It's like the last thing we kind of came to yesterday was
I love it, man.
That just might work.
But like certain things, like they accumulate a certain amount of mass and they become super important.
You know what TYRONE with the underground? It's funny because like in post, it like changed anyway a little bit.
Of course.
We were arguing forever about like something that like really bothered me so much.
Tell me.
Tony was like, it don't matter. They wake up, they go back to character's grandmama's house, and they like spend the night after they saw something crazy. And they wake up the next day and they eat lunch. And then they do this like tale and surveil where they follow this van around. And then it leads them to church. At church, they find this elevator, they go underground, and they come up into a club.
Just to clarify, so they go down like after lunch in the afternoon, and when they come back up later in the script, it's night.
Coming like a
late
night
enough
club.
at night that the club's like packed.
The timeline bothered the shit out of me, right? Like it was like, it don't make sense. They just ate lunch. How they in the club? Like, you know, it's like, how many people? And like the real world logistics of like, club not gonna fill up like at 8 o'clock at night. You know, you come in, and it's a strip club in the movie, but that was for COVID reasons. But like in the script originally, it was just a club, so it was just a mass of people in there. And you're like, how much time did they spend on the ground? Like, did they spend 6 hours down there, 8 hours down there? Because it was like they just ate lunch.
So it didn't bother me.
It didn't bother him.
It didn't
It's
bother
like
me at all.
nobody's gonna care.
No one's gonna care. It really bothered him. We spent like a couple of days on this.
Oh my God.
Movie comes out, nobody ever mentioned it.
So how did we meet? Because I'm pretty sure, Juel, I met you through Tony. And Tony, I think we were at USC around the same time, but I think we really met when we were doing those indie films together.
Yeah.
I think we met on Take Me.
Right, yeah. Because I graduated and then needed a job and wanted to see what like a real set was like. So I found like a PA gig and went on Take Me.
That's right. So this is like 2016, 17.
Yeah.
I was producing some indie films, and Take Me was a movie I made with the Duplass brothers. And it was a very low-budget film shot in LA by director Pat Healy, script written by Mike Makowski, starring Pat Healy and Taylor Schilling. It's honestly like a phenomenal script, great dark comedy. And you were one of our PAs. And I remember like genuinely like talking, and Natalie, my wife and producing partner on that film, remember just being really impressed by you.
You guys were really cool to all the PAs too. And like you guys recognized that like most of the PAs on the set, they wanted to do other things, you know, like PAing was like their foot in the door. So you read some of my scripts and stuff.
Well, yeah. I don't remember how it happened, but I was reading one of your scripts. I was blown away. Because I was like, yo, this dude should not be PAing. Like, he should not be driving a truck around, you know, cleaning up the trash or whatever you're doing. It was like, Tony needs to be like behind a laptop writing scripts so I can produce them. And then shortly after Take Me, we did make Searching, and you were a PA on that, I remember for sure. And you know, that was a very unique set for a lot of reasons. And I remember like just kind of flagging in my head, I'm like, yo, Tony's a writer I should track. Like, you know, maybe one day he'll write something that I can produce. And it wasn't that long after that our paths reunited when it came to Space Jam: A New Legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think we pitched TYRONE before we got Space Jam, right?
Yeah.
We pitched TYRONE, and then because of our pitch for TYRONE, which is like we pitched with arts and crafts, like a tri-board that you get from like CVS, and it had all the scenes like kind of outlined on it. And so I think Spring Hill thought like, oh, these guys at least know structure. So then they brought us in, and that's when you met Juel.
I feel like I met you once before then.
Well, I remember actually you wrote a script at USC that had an Armenian character in it who had a shaved head with the name Sev. And I was like, how do I sue this man for writing? Because I used to have a shaved head. And I was like, oh, and then we meet this. And then I think you guys had him be like a very like disturbing character who was like a...
Wasn't he a mob boss?
He was like a backstabbing.
No, he was a kid. He was one of the kids. Wait, just, look at him trying to... I wrote that. Shout out to Sev.
That's right.
One of my professors wanted me to write a script with him. So I wrote that script with my writing professor.
So can you guys talk about how you two linked up to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, we were in the same semester at USC. So we were in the same cohort. We actually didn't have a lot of classes together except for these big seminar classes. But we used to work out together, you know, so we used to go to the gym together. And so we would just be talking about stuff for writing classes.
You can't see us on the podcast, but we're not.
We ain't buff, you know.
lanky dudes. So,
and so
it didn't really work out.
We didn't go into bodybuilding, but, you know, we could be up in there like benching and whatnot.
Did you guys happen to see each other at the gym, or you guys were like, hey, do you want to go work out together?
If I'm not mistaken, we would just bump into each other at the gym because we was both just going. And so that naturally become like, oh, you know, we all generally have similar schedules.
So how do you guys go from lifting weights to writing together?
So we weren't lifting too heavy of weights. Let's make sure we're not like misrepresenting ourselves.
I think really what it was, I feel like, shout out to my homegirl Shada. Like my homegirl was in writing class with him, and she'd be like, Tony be writing these amazing scripts in class. And I was like, damn, he cold like that? He ain't nicer than me though. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, let me read something, you know. But we would just be hanging out at the gym because I would be there, you know what I'm saying? And so we would just naturally like, hey, can I get a spot? And that would just kind of naturally go to like, all right, you working out, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever. All right, I'm going to meet you here. We go, you know. That way I have a workout partner. I just remember asking him to read something one time. I was like, damn.
I'm just picturing you like on the bench press, like weight in the air, like, hey man, can I read one of your things?
Because at a certain point, it was like, so the inciting incident. So you really thinking about, you know, you're like in the middle of like,
dude, that's
bench
amazing.
press and talk about like, you know, the break in the act too. But like, nah, for real though, I don't remember specifically when, but I just remember like hearing that he was like a great writer though. And I was like wanting to read something. Just being naturally like competitive, probably like, let me see what's up, you know, and then reading it being like, damn, he cold. So at that point, I felt like we just started to talk about the scripts we was writing in classes. And so we would just be working out like, all right, well, what you think about this story point? And then he would be like, oh, I was thinking about doing this. And that just kind of
So you guys were writing your own projects at the time, but still referring to each other for help on your individual projects.
And then we graduated and, you know, joke I always say is just like you graduate film school, no one's willing to give you like $50 million to direct your opus, you know, but writing's cheap. And USC does a good job of like everyone that goes there wants to be a director, and USC's like, that's great. You should also learn how to do something else. So like I gaffed little commercials, I PA'd, Juel did sound work, but neither of us were like good enough at those things, you know. So we just took all our spare time to like write together, and we first just to write, we entered a whole bunch of competitions and stuff just to give ourselves deadlines, because that's the thing you realize you miss when you graduate school is just like the impetus to write then, as opposed to just putting it off until you feel inspired or something. And one of them, it was like an ABC half-hour pilot submission. We just said like, oh, want to just write this together? And so we just wrote that one together, and it's way more fun to like sit in a room joking with somebody than like sitting alone at a computer trying to write. And after that, we just like, we just kept writing together.
It was a last man on earth spec.
Oh, yeah.
So then was the next like evolution of your guys' careers Creed 2?
I mean, like first it was like a fellowship, technically.
You guys wrote a spec pilot and that got into a fellowship?
So I got into the Universal.
He got into the
fellowship.
Got it. Just for folks listening, Universal Fellowship, is it like a directing thing?
It's a screenwriting. So
screenwriting, and you wrote something by yourself?
For most of them, we actually wrote different scripts. So what we would do, like when we applied to all these different competitions and fellowship, we would sit in the room and break the stories. I would break his, break mine, and then we would go and like write them separately, and like, all right, well, Tony almost done, so I got to hurry up, you know what I'm saying? Or like kind of race to make sure we both finished them. And, just for clarification, breaking the story, of course, is when you figure out the nuts and bolts of what actually happens. How A gets to B, gets to C, gets to D. So, man comes in house, then what? And it's breaking the story is really finding that then what, or as, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, the but therefore, or, a lot of people have different ways that they kind of define it, but it's that process.
It's outlining.
Yeah. So for most of them, we would break all of the stories and then go write them separately until we did the half-hour comedy spec. We was like, man, that was actually a lot more fun. And serendipitously, I got into the Universal Fellowship. And that, like everything just cracks the door a little bit, you know what I'm saying? So you have a couple of meetings with people because they, there's like one blurb on Deadline or like a little blurb on Variety. And then it gave you just enough legitimacy, barely, that like you weren't like a completely random person.
So like reps and stuff would contact him, and he met a couple of them, and he would tell them like, oh yeah, I write a lot with this one dude. Like, do you want to meet him too? And so we met some of them. And then there was one agent that ultimately did want to sign him. And he said, oh, great. Like, do you want to meet Tony too? And I don't remember who it was, but the dude was like, I don't know Tony. So I remember he said, like, he didn't want to meet me, so Juel didn't even sign with him.
That's crazy.
And I told him at the time, no, like, do it. Like, when you're starting out, being repped seems like the be-all, end-all, right? And it's not quite, but, like, it's definitely a huge step, So, like, I mean, even remember at the time, like, thinking, like, man, like, if I can just get repped, right, then my career will start. So it meant a lot to me that, like, he had the opportunity to get repped, and he didn't do it just because they wouldn't meet me.
Man, that's crazy. That's such loyalty from you, Juel.
Oh, no.
Maybe, and that rep probably regrets the heck out of that now.
I always remember it.
Who knows? I mean, I'm sure they doing good.
Sounds like you guys are producing quite a lot of scripts out of school. Like, you guys really put the work in while you had your side jobs, I'm assuming, to pay some bills and rent and stuff like that.
That was because we entered these competitions. That's like, if we ever like talk at a class, like that's almost like one of the number one advice we give is that, like, especially starting out, like quantity has a certain quality to it. Like you could spend like 3 years like making that perfect, really personal script that only you can tell. But like the industry is so subjective that like, when you finally get that script to a producer, they just might not like that material. It has nothing to do with the quality of it, but they just might not like it. But forcing ourselves to do those competitions, we wrote like 3 or 4 scripts within as many months.
Yeah, we were more than that. Sundance, 2 TV scripts. I had already had a feature script. You wrote a feature script. ABC, which was 2 half-hour pilots. Universal was a new script. Film Independent, Nichols. Like, and so, we wrote like 5 or 6 scripts in like 6 months.
That's amazing.
They weren't all features though. Some of them were like half hours, you know what I mean? But they were all like super different. So I think like the randomness of like the subject matter and like the genre, helped us in the future because people would gravitate toward different things. Like someone would read the indie drama script and like it, and all of a sudden they think of us as like, oh, we're drama writers. And then somebody read like the half hour and loved it. It was like, oh, they are comedy writers. And so you end up like, meeting people for different scripts and they start to look at you and compartmentalize you in a certain way.
Just to recap, like, you guys are hardly out of school. You've produced a very high volume of very, very different types of scripts. Juel, you land that Universal Fellowship. That gets you a couple of meetings around town, not a lot, a handful. That opens the door a little bit more. You get offered representation, but you deny it because they didn't want to meet with Tony. And next thing you know, you guys are meeting with other reps. And I imagined for the reps you guys sign with, like, the fact that you have a whole library at this point, for being however young you guys were and so fresh out of school, that's got to be mad attractive because you guys come across as like professional screenwriters now. What's next?
We had a few execs from the Universal Fellowship and like that general window of meeting people. Out of that, we got to know a couple of execs at Lionsgate. One, Aaron Edmonds, Dana Gills. And Aaron was the first person who reached out, and that led its way to like, hey, we got this rewrite job for Lionsgate Digital, and it was literally like, I don't know if we were repped yet, but it was very much like a sit down and somebody, hey, we got a job. And it was, it was a smaller movie, but we were like, give me that. Because we never got paid to write before. So it was like,
that's huge.
This wasn't a big project, but we, we got excited about it all the same, you know what I mean? It was a British dance movie, you know what I'm saying? We like, and we worked it in a way that we got really excited about it.
So you guys rewrote a script?
Yeah. And we, did our best, and they seemed like really happy with it, and that just kind of ingratiated us a little bit with Lionsgate, and we got to know them, and it was just the snowball thing again. By the time we wrote that, just in terms of our confidence of like, if we could do okay, I think this wasn't that crazy. Like, you got to kind of see it in practice to feel like it's possible in some ways,
So let's fast forward to Creed 2. How did that job come about? Super
random. We had set up this TV show with Macro. That's how we got to know Macro. We was trying to be in the writer's room for a TV show they had, and our sample, they wanted to buy it. And wanted to make it as a show. And so we got to know them. We were actually developing that proof of concept. And I ended up getting coffee with Stephen Capel, Steve Capel Jr., who directed Creed 2, just did Transformers. This is a film called The Land. Just like amazing director. And he went to USC with us. And he was a few semesters ahead of us. And so he was going when we were coming. And socially, I knew him because there's only so many black people at USC. So you gonna know all the black folks at USC. But I didn't know him like creatively, we never done anything together. And my homie Steve Love, who ended up being a producer on TYRONE, he was like, yo, you should hit up Steve and y'all should, connect, man. And so I connected with Steve and just gave him a bunch of scripts and thought nothing of it for like the next 6 months. I didn't even know if he had read them. Fast forward to we're working on that proof of concept and basically prep, because we're about to shoot it. And Tony's getting ready to shoot a short film. And like, I kid you not, like the weekend, he goes to Oregon to scout. Steve's like, man, I put your name in the hat for Creed 2. It's like, huh? Man, I put your name in the hat for Creed 2. I'm like, all right, for sure. I ain't think nothing of it because like, I ain't finna get it. So I'm like, all right, So I called Tony. I'm like, hey, Steve just said he put my name in the hat for Creed 2, and like, I don't know. He like, what? I'm like, I don't know. Went to his house, talked to him. That was like Sunday. By Thursday, I had got the job.
Wow.
And so like, by the time Tony got back from Oregon, I got the job.
What is it like to get that job? I mean, are you meeting with the executives at the studio?
Like basically Monday or Tuesday, I think Tuesday maybe, I went to MGM and met with the execs, and they were, they grilled. They were hilarious. They like grilling me, because they're like, "How fast have you written a script? Have you written a script with pressure?" I was like, "Yeah, well, I wrote a script in a week one time. Forget that script. How can you write a script with the pressure? Well, Sly's got notes, but Mike's got notes." They like asking. I'm like, "Hey man, I can just leave. I just heard about this a couple of days ago." So I didn't.
And
think
had those execs
of it.
read your samples that Steven had shared?
Yeah, and so they liked the script, but they just didn't think it was like this is a big job. They called. Actually, shout out to Sarah Scott at Universal. So I was in the Universal Fellowship. They called Universal. Sarah Scott, like, yo, he was great. We loved him. They called Charles King. We had just set up a TV show. Charles King, Macro, like, we love him, And so, again, it wasn't like completely random. You know what I'm saying? And so Steve was just like adamant. He was like, man, for whatever reason, and I to this day won't know, he was just like, man, that's what I'm on.
But wait, were you rewriting a script or were you writing a new one from scratch?
It was both, right? It was like they had previous drafts, but Steve wanted to do a page one. So it was like, it's a Rocky movie, so you know you're going to run up the steps, you know you're going to have training montage. It's a little easier to structure it because the structure is 7 movies deep by now.
Right,
so you know.
Right. Did you guys write it together?
Yes, but like unofficially, right? So it was like the worst kept secret at a certain point. But like I didn't know to tell Steve, and at first I'm like, damn. And so right away, I go to Steve's house the first day. We just kicking ideas and like just at his house all day. And I'm like, yo, it's cool if Tony just come by and just kick ideas. He's like, all right, cool, whatever, And so like Tony came like the next day. And then at the end, he's like, is Tony coming tomorrow? Like.
So this opportunity presented itself. You had that personal connection to Steven. He had read all your scripts. And when push came to shove, the people that were going to hire you for this job, they were able to call people in your past who can all vouch for you.
Yeah.
So it may seem like, you got out of school, next thing you know, you're writing this like sequel to a hit movie, but like it really was all those steps you guys are taking that all paid off in this moment.
Yeah.
And
so it's very
writing all those
serendipitous.
scripts, honestly.
All those
goes
scripts.
back to that like that little bit of like quantity. It helped.
Because that quantity is what makes you come across as a professional. So you've written Creed 2, becomes a hit movie. It's fantastic. And this is around the time that we all started working together again. And again, the word on the street was that you guys were like great, new, hot, young writers. And I think part of it, now that I remember, was about speed. I think it was like you guys had this reputation of like, these guys work fast. They're full of ideas. They have a great like commercial sensibility. There's like a coolness to your guys' writing. Could you guys speak about like how that reputation maybe was built and like how much of this has to do with you guys pitching around town?
Yeah, because I feel like if people said that, and I think it's a little hyperbole, but
it's definitely hyperbolic.
But I think it's because of Tyrone. Because when we had pitched Tyrone around town by then,
that's what it was.
And Tyrone kind of came about because a producer friend of ours, Brian Smiley, brought us into Sony to pitch a remake of the movie Last Dragon. And so we pitched it. They ultimately didn't end up taking it. But like in that pitch, he said like, hey, don't you have like an original idea that you always wanted to do? Like,
yeah, so he wanted us to like write it on spec, but we had just started to get work for the first time.
Yeah.
And so we had this idea and it was just like an elevator pitch, like, oh, it'd be great to do this Detective Scooby-Doo movie. And like Brian and then this exec, Josh McLaughlin, who was at Focus at the time when I was in the Universal Fellowship, I had kicked the idea to him and like the idea to Brian, and they'd always just like check back in. What's up with that? They cloned, it wasn't even called they cloned Tyrone then, but like, what's up with the idea? When you gonna do that? He's like, we working for the first time, so who knows when? And then that's when like Brian, like after that Last Dragon pitch,
was like come in a week, or maybe it was less than a week, and I'll set up a meeting with some execs and you guys can pitch it. And we didn't have anything other than just like, he had said once, it's like, I kind of want to do a movie about like clones in the hood. And then so we basically took I think that meeting was maybe on like Monday or something like that. And we were meeting with them on Friday. And so like just from Monday to basically Friday morning, we just like broke the story and we put it on like a triboard, very like, arts and crafts with every scene outlined and all the sequences organized. And we, stayed up all night Thursday night and then went to the pitch. Because, like in Hollywood, like when someone wants something, everyone wants to make sure they don't miss it.
Yeah.
So
there's a big FOMO going around. Yeah.
Exactly. So like our reps did a really good job of like in those interviewing days while we were breaking the story, they kind of like stoked the flames. And on Friday and Saturday, we had a ton of meetings around town. And we literally drove from one to the other. Stephen Love came and drove us like from one to the other. And he was like in the room pitching with us too and stuff. And that, I think, people liked the Tyrone story. And so I think if people were talking about, like, I think it came from that original idea.
I think so too.
Right?
And like, I mean, what's great about it is that like that movie and that premise and that pitch, I'm sure like it's so unique, but at the same time familiar. Could you guys speak about what you guys actually do in the room when you're pitching?
It depends on the pitch, but with that one, in that one, I think we broke the most conventions. We had to break the story. We had to figure out what we was pitching. It was like wanting to make basically a bootleg Scooby-Doo movie. And so all we knew was a detective movie, and we had some thematic synergy, but we didn't, know what the A to B to C was. So we never practiced the pitch. We finished gluing the last note card, making the Spotify playlist, finished making a little slideshow, and then we had to leave, and then just practice it while we driving, like, okay, let's go over the story, So it was in a lot of ways, like one of the more freestyle pitches. But it taught us a lot, though.
So Spotify, you guys are playing music?
Yeah.
To set the mood? Like
mechanical, logistically, the way we did is like we would get there first, go in the room. We had a playlist that would just be playing in the room. So when the execs come in, they see the music. And then we asked to use whatever screen was in the room and put up just a rotating slideshow of like images that we thought were like germane to the movie. So we never referenced the images or anything like that. But
it wasn't like our main character, click, nothing like that.
It was just like cycling automatically.
Stuff from like Boogie Nights, Jackie Brown. I mean, all kind like, but then also like different like just photography stuff, like
there's
Todd
a lot of music.
Hito.
Yeah, music video stuff too is in there.
We had a lot of screenshots from heavy metal in there. We had some Khalil Joseph stuff in there. When the Quiet Comes, like Flying Lotus. Like we had like music videos, photography. We just had still shots that felt like it had a certain aesthetic vibe we liked.
Did you guys assign like, okay, well, you're gonna cover, you'll start Tony, and then Juel will go. Like,
we broke it into sequences.
Yeah, because we write with the 8 sequences. That's how we like organize our stuff. So it's literally like he did sequence 1, I did sequence 2. He did sequence 3, like that.
And then
we
your producer was also
story.
in the room, you said.
Yeah,
Steve Love was in there.
They would ask like logistical questions, and then so Steven answered those and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like again, like I feel like what we learned though when we were pitching, you never know how somebody, like we thought the first pitch was terrible. It was like, oh fuck. It really felt like we just like completely like dropped the bag, and we got an offer like while we were driving to the set.
Yeah, we were driving to the other way. So we can do better. We need to do this. We need to make it shorter somehow.
We were driving, having a straight come to Jesus.
Dude, that's incredible.
And got an offer on the way.
Like you're expecting the guy to be like, what did you guys do in there? But he's like, they want in. That's awesome.
But that's kind of somewhat tangential to the thing that we learned in terms of like, I think we had a visual aid, this board with all these note cards. Like the writing's too small. You can't like turn around and like look at it and read the thing. And so really I think like it was very casual and conversational in terms of the way we pitch it, which is why it went so long, But like one of our teachers said like, man, what's a movie that you really loved? And like when you tell somebody about that movie, like for me, like Godzilla -1, for example, and like when you describe, you're trying to get somebody to go see that movie. Remember how excited you are when you're like, man, bro, I just see, you know what I mean? Like, dog, like you have a different kind of enthusiasm when you're trying to convince somebody to go see a movie that you just saw that you loved. Even though we probably messed up a lot of like story points and we probably skipped beats and we over elongated beats. We pitched the whole thing like we just saw Godzilla -1.
Sick.
You know what I'm saying? And so that enthusiasm in terms of that we were pitching it like, Fontaine, right? Oh, you know what I mean? Like we pitched it in a way that made it seem like we thought it was the shit.
That's such good advice. Honestly, I think even having your note cards with the sequence and outlines, I imagine that's probably just a nice peace of mind for the execs of like, oh, these guys have done the work. Like, we're not just buying like, a whisper. Like there's actually like, an outline almost at this point.
I think it serves twofold. One is like our very conversational style, I think works as like makes you excited and everything. But like having the visual aid also allows them to kind of track where they are in the story because we would like bookmark it, like an exciting incident. Like we would try to make sure that we bookmarked when we were breaking into Act 2, so you could look on the board and see, oh, they're right around here. Like, they could that's the thing with like when you pitch ideas or stories and like someone's listening is like, this is a long time. And then you hear is like, and that's the end of Act 1.
Yes.
Yes. But if you're looking and tracking it, I think you're right. Like it does impress upon this idea that they have a sort of a structure that they're adhering to. And I do think that board led to us getting Space Jam, honestly, like, cause just the execs seeing that like we knew structure.
Again, I gotta say, man, professional. Like you guys talking about being casual pitching or conversational pitches and stuff, but it overwhelmingly comes across like you guys do the work. You put your heads down, even if it's all happening the night before the pitch, you're gonna get the job done. Like you do, you actually do your homework as far as like structurally knowing what the organization of your story is. Like that stuff I think comes across more than in one place, I imagine, is sending in offers at this point.
Yeah.
And then you guys ultimately, I remember this is like a big splashy deal you guys had. It was in partnership with Macro and Netflix.
It wasn't Macro and Netflix at first. We actually pitched it twice. We pitched it the first time to all the places, and we actually closed with Macro because they offered us the most like contractual protections in terms of like there were no kill fees, and you are pitching to be the director, and so naturally there's a little bit of, I mean, some places didn't offer because they wanted the script but didn't want
you as a director.
More or less me as a director, right?
Sure.
And why would they? I mean, if I was them, I wouldn't hire me to do it, right? Like, so, like, well, I don't know what they was thinking, right? And so, you know, in the studios, like, they gotta like protect their ass. So it's like there's kill fees of like, okay, in the event that we hire a director, we'll pay you this much. I was like, oh, you know, it's like you don't think it's gonna happen, but like Macro basically offered us like no other writers, no director. If you don't make it, movie don't exist. And so like they had a lot more shared control of the IP and like just a lot of more like that type of stuff, peace of mind. And so we went with Macro, and then once we realized that the budget, we hadn't written the script yet. So once we wrote the script and then they budgeted it out and they were like, okay, we want a producing partner, we want a financing partner really, right? And so then we went back to all the studios and that's when we ended up with Netflix.
I remember around this time, you guys also had this huge sale of a short story that you wrote. And I remember being really impressed because at this point, we'd already been working together on Space Jam, and I saw you guys are really, really strong on Final Draft, on writing screenplays for the big screen or television. But the next thing I know, like, the word is you guys had written like a 10-page short story called By All. That also blew up, and it ended up landing you guys a really nice deal as well. What compelled you guys to suddenly switch gears and write a short story?
When we're in writing mode, we spend like a lot of the day together. You know, it's like 10 or 12 hours every day. And that sounds impressive, but like we're really probably only actually writing for like 3 hours, right? Like the other hours are like watching stupid YouTube videos or like just bullshitting about random stuff. And one day we were bullshitting about something and this idea came up. The short story is about more or less like crowdsourcing justice. And so I think that was an idea that we had that we thought was cool, but like either didn't want to invest the time into making it into a script, and in addition to didn't know if other people would like it. At the time we wrote it with the intention of, oh, maybe this could be a Black Mirror episode. You know, it's a small commitment of time. We just wrote it, sent it to our reps, said like, oh, maybe this could be a Black Mirror episode. And then they liked it and ended up, again, they you know, really earned their 10% because they are the ones that like stoke the flame of that, you know?
Tony's being modest because Tony's a machine when it comes to short stories. So we had this idea. Tony's like, hey, I wrote a little something, read this and revise it. And I was like, huh?
So on your own, you'd gotten written like these 10 pages essentially.
Yeah. Tony did.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
But it's sort of like...
I don't want him giving me credit for, you know what I'm saying? Like he wrote it.
But the idea came from, like I said, just these bullshitting conversations
together,
we had. I mean, short stories are fun to write because you can, again, it's just the ease of getting an idea out. Even the idea of writing short stories came from, we were in a general meeting and people were talking about this short story that was going around that sold for $1 million. It was called Life Sentence. And I was like, I got to read this. So I asked one of the execs to send it to me, and it's about like 20 pages double spaced. I was like, man, this sold for $1 million. This isn't a complete movie or anything. It's really just an exercise of a concept, right? And so that's why I just decided, take some time, write this thing. And what I think we learned from the process of that going out is that like there is a benefit sometimes to sending out something that's not a script.
Yeah.
Because everyone can see their favorite version of it in what you send out. Versus if you send them a script, they see exactly what it is. They can decide if they like it or don't, you know? Even if you sell a script somewhere, like it's a collaborative process, right? But the idea of selling a short story, like that collaboration is even heightened. You know, so everyone kind of saw their favorite version of the movie in there. It's a low investment of time on our end compared to a script. So now we always give the advice, like, if you have a concept that you like, but maybe you're not sure of, or even you don't know what it is, just try writing. Take a week, write a 10-page short story, you know?
I mean, it's still impressive because, like, writing a short story is writing prose. Like, that's not what you guys went to school for. You know, so writing a screenplay is such a specific thing. But I know, like, just another benefit of a short story is, like, as an executive, it's a little bit interesting because you're submitted screenplays all the time. It's very rare to get a short story submission, especially from at the time you guys had already made a name for yourselves, like with the TYRONE pitch. Which, like, by the way, like, that whole TYRONE thing was, like, one executive who you guys had a connection with asked you to come pitch it, but you guys had these smart reps who turned that into like a whole thing, and now you guys have the Creed 2 credit behind you, you have the TYRONE reputation behind you, and now you come out with a short, it's huge.
We're always like very conscious of what you just said. Like, we know like execs get a ton of scripts all the time, right?
Yeah.
So we're always like very conscious of how our stuff is presented and presenting it in an interesting way. Like you said, a short story is one way, or we make a lot of websites.
So that's what I want to get to. You guys have a pitch presentation style that I've literally never seen. And we were talking about working together on a project with a major studio using a piece of IP that exists. And I remember being like, yeah, like, I want to read the treatment or outline, you know, like, send it to me. And I was expecting to get a PDF in my inbox, but what you guys sent me was a HTTPS like website. It was you guys literally had made a website that essentially reads like a treatment because you're scrolling down and kind of like continuing the story. But because you had designed the website, there's like images that are loading at certain points. There's music that's playing at certain points. And it was like incredible. And again, I just want to stress again, especially for folks that are listening, like, it sounds like I'm talking about a lot of style over substance, but at the end of the day, like, your substance was always very strong. Like, it was always built around something that you guys had written. And I'd love to hear what you guys, like, what got you guys into these websites? Because I know there's even a project that you guys are writing right now. You guys have been sending it out as a website that's not a treatment.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just us being stupid.
It was actually one of our classmates, Edson Oda, who he made a movie a few years ago called 9 Days, which is great. But for another project, he had made a website because he came from advertising. He was in advertising in Brazil. So like, even his approach to certain things is just slightly unconventional. And he had sent this website for something. I was like, that's a great idea. And then so we made websites. We made one for Riotville, which included the short film that Juel shot for it. And we just realized that like the barrier to an exec clicking a link in an email is less than the barrier to clicking a PDF and opening it up. You know, always in like UX design, they always talk about like ease of clicks and everything. And it's just less intimidating, I think, for someone to open up a website that they can easily scroll down that has some music and some media than it is to open a 120-page script and read it. And so,
or even a 5-page just densely packed, you know, Word document where you just see Times New Roman just,
and you can, when you incorporate other media, you get across like tone, which I think like tone is something that Juel's amazing at, right? And I do think it's one of the things that's like not talked about a lot, but like separates good scripts from great scripts. And like when we mentioned our pitch where we included the images and the music, that was all to set like the tone, you know? And that's something that you can also do on a website by just the images and the music you choose.
Yeah, I think that's something like, again, like one of the things we learned from that TYRONE pitch specifically is that like people don't necessarily they might walk away with a few plot points that they remember. Like if you were to go in a room and pitch something, let's say it's a 20-minute pitch, they might remember like, oh, that cool train scene or when the avalanche happened or, you know, the fire. But like by and large, they're going to forget the details of that story. And I think like the thing that sticks with them, you know, if you can somehow create the tone and vibe, it's like the mood of the movie, the feeling of the movie or the TV show, whatever you're pitching at, like that's much more likely to stick in their subconscious than like the details, right? Like they'll probably forget everything, but who's the main person name? What's the big set piece? And like the comings and goings of the plot, it's gonna be in one ear and out the other anyway, no matter what it is. And so if you can leave an impression, a tonal impression, like just something that feels a little bit more visceral, they're much more likely to want to hear more, or they might buy it in the room. You know what I mean? It's like if they get wrapped up in the feeling of like the tone, because we all have movies that when I think of Big Lebowski, it has a vibe to it. You know, if I think of Boogie Nights and Jackie, or these movies that we try to emulate the feeling of like you're in this world that's been like very specifically created for this particular project. And I think like a lot of movies that we were hoping to be in that language of, you know, have very strong like tones and very strong like vibes. And so like trying to get that to stick to the room as you leave, and they just keep this feeling of like, I don't know what it is, but I like that. I want to see something that feels like that.
Prox Recs.
So we're going to do our Prox Recs section for all of our listeners out there. What is something you've read, something you've watched, something you recently purchased or discovered, anything that you think is worth a recommendation?
A book I read recently that I really like is not a hidden gem because it's like the most popular book this year, but it's Tomorrow. I really liked it.
Is that about the video game designers?
Yeah, it's a like unconventional romance between two video game designers that kind of grow up together, mid-90s to early aughts. And I loved it. I read a ton of sci-fi, and I don't read a lot of straight, just like, you would categorize it as just like a drama or like a romance. But I thought it was so genuine and nice. And there was even one chapter where like I almost got teary-eyed. I'm not like an emotional person, but this one chapter, and if, movies can do that relatively easy, but for a book to do that to me, I was like, damn. So that's great. I read Murakami he's a long distance runner. He has a book called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, and he relates running to his writing process that I thought was really good and inspiring. Those aren't like hidden finds. It's one of the biggest authors in the world and like one of the biggest books right now, but I liked him.
Nice.
I snubbed something that I really loved that I saw lately, and they asked me somebody asked me to like write these like, favorite movies and TV shows of the year. And it was like one that I like, as soon as I said that, I was like, oh man, I forgot Blackberry. That's a great movie. And I was like, I gotta give Blackberry some love because ain't nobody talking about Blackberry, but I really love Blackberry. Like, it was great.
I'm going to recommend a video game.
Oh,
nice.
Okay. I'll probably go try to look it up.
Called 12 Minutes.
Oh,
have you guys played this?
No, but it's an Annapurna game, right?
Yeah. Brilliant. It's a time loop game, like in the vein of Groundhog Day. It's literally set in a span of 12 minutes. You play a guy coming home to his apartment with his wife, and shortly after, there's a knock at the door, and Willem Dafoe shows up as a cop who basically tries to kill you. And every time you die, every time you leave the apartment, anytime you try and do almost anything crazy, it resets the time. So it's a brilliant like video game because it kind of leans into like video games in general. Like you kind of can like, if you die, you reload, right? Like the same idea of a Groundhog Day type movie, but in the tiniest span possible. And the lengths of story that you can pack into what happens in 12 minutes, it's so brilliant. So it's worth a play on, PlayStation, Switch, whatever.
We say it all the time. Like any video games are so creative. Like they really like put films to shame in terms of innovation and stuff.
Thank you so much, Tony, Juel. Really appreciate having you guys on our show.
Appreciate it, man.
Thank you. That's fun.
In Proximity is a production of Proximity Media. If you like the show, help us spread the word. Send a link to your friends and loved ones. Follow, rate, and review In Proximity on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And follow us on social media. We're at Proximity Media on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. To learn more about us and read episode transcripts, head to proximitymedia.com. In Proximity executive producers are Ryan Coogler, Zinzi Coogler, Sev Ohanian, and Paola Mardo. That's me. Our theme song and additional music is composed by Ludwig Göransson. Caitlin Plummer is our producer, Celine Mendiola is our associate producer. Our editors are Cedric Wilson and Judybelle Camangyan. Ken Nana is our sound designer and mix engineer. Isabella Miller is our production assistant. Alexandria Santana is our social media coordinator. Special thanks to all the other folks who helped make this show possible, the whole Proximity Media team, and to you for listening to In Proximity.
I mean, obviously, Godzilla -1 is amazing. It is my favorite blockbuster since Top Gun.
I'm 2 movies away from watching it. I can't wait.
What are the 2 movies?
I can't say it, man. These are filmmakers we all know.
Bebe's Kids, man. Like, I love Bebe's Kids, man. Don't watch that for the 10th time. Watch Godzilla.